Welcome to Q&A practice. Let's get started with a little warm-up. We'll start with the defense attorney. Ready? Here we go. Do you remember the conversation you had with Mrs. Bold regarding that? Well, she asked me whether she could hang her clothes, and I said yes. And was that the day she did hang them? Yes. About when was it? Well, the time I do not know. I really don't remember. Where did this conversation take place? It was in my backyard. Was anyone else present at the time? My daughter was there. How old is your daughter? 4. And what did you tell Mrs. Bold about it? I didn't tell her anything about it. Well, did you tell her that she could or could not? I said she could hang her clothes, and she proceeded to take advantage then of your facilities. Yes. Did you help her the first time that she was there? Yes, she was in a hurry, and I helped her hang them up. At about what time of day was that? Do you remember? Well, it was in the morning. I don't know the exact time. Well, would you say it was 2 hours before noon or an hour before noon? Oh, well, around 9, I guess. And was the dog there at that time? Yes, it was. Incidentally, what kind of dog is this? It's just a dog. How large is the dog? Not terribly big. Would you say he is 2 feet high if he is standing on 4 legs? Gosh, I don't know. Do you know how heavy the dog is? No, I don't. I have never weighed it. Approximately how old is the dog? Around 9. I don't know exactly. Back to our transcript, some 4-voice practice. And we will start with the plaintiff attorney. Ready? Here we go. Okay, where was he staying at that time that the accident occurred? I believe in Tustin. Did you ever live with Mr. Majors? No. Had you ever known Mr. Majors to be arrested for any kind of felony? Yes. Okay, and what kind of felony would that have been? Possession, I believe. Possession of cocaine, marijuana. Okay, that may or may not be a felony, depending on the quantity. I don't know, and it's not really for us to go into. I was just trying to find out the status as far as convictions go, so that's the only kind of criminal background that you knew Mr. Majors to have. And was that prior? This arrest, we'll call it for marijuana, was that prior to the time of this accident in 09? Before, yes. Have you ever known Mr. Majors to use cocaine? No. Even to this day? No. Before the date of this accident, back in August, and I'll say August 7th of 2009, had Mr. Majors ever driven that 2006 Toyota Camry? Yes. Approximately how many times before this accident had he driven that vehicle? Approximately 6 to 7 times. Now, prior to the date of the accident, on the 6 or 7 times that he had driven that car, had it been with your permission that he drove that car? No. Had it been with Mr. Bradford's permission that he drove that car? Yes. Did Mr. Bradford have a set of keys to the car? Yes. Did you have a set of keys to the car? Yes. Okay, on the day of this accident, who was, strike that, was there more than 2 sets of keys to the car? No. Okay, on the day of the accident, whose car, keys, if keys were used, was Mr. Majors using to drive that car? If you know, Andrews. Did you have knowledge on the day of this accident, prior to the time before the accident occurred? Did you know that Mr. Majors was going to use that vehicle on that day? No. Is the first time that you found out that Mr. Majors had used the car on that day of this accident after the accident had already occurred? I don't understand. Okay, that was a bad question. You indicated that before the accident occurred, you didn't know that Mr. Majors was driving the vehicle on that date. Is that correct? True, yes. At some time on the day of the accident, did you find out that Mr. Majors had driven the car after the accident, but on the day of the accident, right? See what I'm asking? When did you first find out that Mr. Majors had driven the car on the day of the accident? When did I first find out? The day of the accident. Good, thank you. And that was sometime after the accident had already occurred, right? It was later in the day after the accident? Yes, right? Yes. Okay, now did you ever object to Mr. Majors or tell him not to drive this car that was in your name at any time before the accident occurred? Yes. When did this happen that you objected to his driving the car? About a week before the accident. And what did you say, if anything? I told him and I told Andrew that I didn't want to be responsible if anything was to happen to the car since my name was on it. What caused you to say that? Because when the time of the accident, when Keith had possession of the car, Andrew was in the hospital. And that's what I said, while he was in the hospital. Then I felt I should have the car at least, And when did Andrew go into the hospital? Around that time, I'm not for sure, but it was around that time. He was in the hospital maybe a week before the accident, and he was in the hospital at the time on the day of the accident too. Yes. What was he in the accident or in the hospital for? He had somebody ran over him in a car, a hit and run. So you indicated that approximately 1 week before this accident occurred that we're here talking about today, that you had told Mr. Majors and Mr. Bradford that you didn't want Mr. Majors driving the car because you didn't want to be responsible. Yes. Where did you make this statement? At the hospital. Okay, Mr. Majors was there visiting. At the same time as you. Yes. Now, where was this car usually kept? In Andrew's possession. What time frame are we talking about now? On the day of the accident. Strike that. Where was the car usually kept? Say 2 weeks before the accident, before Mr. Bradford had been in the hospital that he was in. It was in Arthur's possession, but Andrew was living with Keith at the time, so it must have been at Keith's house. You weren't living with Mr. Bradford at the time that this accident occurred? No. Did you ever contact the police department or any kind of law enforcement agency prior to the time, meaning before the time that this accident occurred, to let them know that you objected or you didn't want Mr. Majors to drive the car? No. In other words, you never reported it stolen? No. Did you ever contact anybody from the Department of Motor Vehicles at any time prior to the time that this accident occurred to inform them that you didn't want to be responsible for any damage that might be done either to or with the car if it was driven by Mr. Majors? No. Had you seen Mr. Majors on the day of this accident before it happened? No. When you spoke with Mr. Bradford and Mr. Majors at the hospital, were there any bad feelings with Mr. Majors driving the vehicle? What did Mr. Bradford say about it? He just wanted Keith to keep the car, just told me I couldn't have the car. So in other words, maybe I'm reading between the lines here, but when you were at the hospital and when you said in front of Mr. Majors and Mr. Bradford that you didn't want Mr. Majors driving it because you could be responsible, you at the same time actually wanted the car to be given over to you so that you could keep it in your possession? Right, yes. Do you have insurance on this vehicle? Yes. Did you pay the insurance premiums on the vehicle? No. Did Mr. Bradford? Yes. You said that Mr. Bradford and Mr. Majors, prior to Mr. Bradford's entrance into the hospital, both lived at Mr. Majors' house, right? Yes. And the address at Mr. Majors' house at that time was Tustin. I don't know exactly the address. Do you know what street it was on? It was on Pine, I believe. It was very close to where this accident occurred, isn't it? Right, yes. Do you know approximately how far from Mr. Majors' house it was to where the accident occurred? Approximately half a mile, after the accident. How did you find out that your car or the car that was in your name was involved in this accident? Keith came by and told me. And what did he tell you happened? Just that, he was in an accident and the car was totaled out. Did he also tell you that he had a passenger in the vehicle with him? Yes. And who did he say was with him on that day? Kevin. Kevin who? Roberts. And did you know Kevin Roberts prior to the day of this accident? Yeah, not as just an acquaintance. I didn't know him that well. Did you ever know Kevin Roberts to use cocaine? No. Prior to the day of this accident? No. Was Mr. Majors taken to jail on the day of this accident? From what I understand. But did he tell you he was taken to jail? Yes, he did. Why did he tell you he was taken to jail? I don't know why he told me. I'd object. It calls for speculation. I kind of understood it the same way he did. Okay, that was very sharp. Did Mr. Majors tell you for what purpose the police took him to jail? Yes. And what did he say? He just said that they thought he was under the influence of something, but they released him the night at the hospital. It wasn't like he was taken to jail. I don't know what kind of an arrest it was. Let's finish up with our Q&A warm-up that we were doing earlier. We'll start with defense attorney. Ready? Then on the first occasion when she was in there, was the dog present? Yes, he was. Was he loose in the yard? He is always loose in the yard. You do not keep him tied within the yard? Oh no. Did you ever let him out of the yard? No, he is always in the back. Do you remember whether the dog played with any of the children, either Mrs. Bolt's children or the other children that were there? Oh yes, because my daughter's friends come over on the occasion in question. Were there children there? No, because it was too early. Children don't come over at that time. But they were over there then, were they not? No, there was nobody there then except my daughter. No other children? No other children. Then did you have any conversation with Mrs. Bolt about returning for the clothes? Yes, I told her to be sure and call me and let me know when she came back. And this conversation you had was after the clothes were hung? Yes, that's right. She was starting to go. And did you say anything else at that time? I don't remember. Did she say anything else? That I don't remember. And when she did return, when did you first see her? When? Well, I had just laid my daughter down for a nap, and I heard the dog barking, so I went out to see what she was barking about, and there stood Mrs. Bolt in the backyard. Did you see anyone else? Her daughter was with her. Was the daughter in the yard at that time? Well, she was half and half. She was in between the gate and was she standing in the gateway? Is that what you mean? Yes, she was just coming through the gate into the yard. And that will conclude our Q&A practice.